Good evening, this is Goldie, also known as Mr. Anecdotal, Mr. Pasty, and the Talking Head. It's Wednesday, August 24th, 2011. Remember, most importantly, I rant so you don't have to. If I don't have your email and you'd like to receive the script of each show, send your email to my new email address, which is goldyrant@gmail.com. I have one thing to say, and that is the universe does not care. I promise. Here's a brief summary of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the drug war, and I'm going to talk about overpopulation. I had my radio on today, and I realized that I would be doing you a disservice between now and the election if I continued to do this rant. Actually, a disservice to me as well. All the pundits from both parties are trying to get their candidates elected. I'm unable to watch Fox for the time being, listen to Rush, or other volatile broadcasts and broadcasters. Let me give you an example. I was listening to Neil Bortz today. Neil's a free enterprise guy, Republican. Get the government off of our backs. Don't let the government tell us what to do. Let the free market rule. That is, of course, unless the free market is doing something that you do not like, as in Martin Luther King's family getting paid $800,000 for King's likeness on the statue and the use of his writings in the memorial. I looked at my newspaper on August 19th, 2011, and was not surprised to see the following story about our 9th undeclared war. U.S. says Syrian leader must go. Also, I think that this Libyan thing is going to end badly, meaning Obama will claim success and Democrats will be happy. However, tonight Fox reported that the U.S. was worried about Libya's nuclear stockpile and Gaddafi's WMD program. We will be there forever, I promise. They also have tons of oil. Let's go to the drug war and start with an article regarding an actual medicinal use of marijuana. I mean, I know you always hear about the fake medical marijuana, people that are out there, they're just trying to get it legalized, they just want to get high. Let's go ahead and read this, or a portion of this one. This is why a mother uses pot to treat her autistic son. It was July 6, 2011 on MSNBC. Medical marijuana is used to treat dozens of ailments, and one mother swears by it to help her severely autistic son. Miko Hester Perez didn't make the decision lightly, but 2.5 years ago her son weighed just 42 pounds. Today he weighs 112 pounds. My son was absolutely withering away. You could see the bones in his chest, Hester Perez says. After doing a lot of research, Hester Perez decided to get a medical marijuana card for her son Joey. The first time she gave him a pot brownie, she says she saw immediate results. He was calm, sociable, happy, more productive. We had a hard time finding any doctor to criticize Hester Perez's decision to treat Joey's autism with medical marijuana. But Dr. Seth Amaran, a Stanford professor who's also on the American Academy of Pediatrics Substance Abuse Committee, is concerned. He says, parents have the best interests of their kids at heart, but they want to do what's best for the kids. But as a medical professional who really needs to look at the science behind recommendations, I can't in good conscience recommend it. The main reason Dr. Amaran won't recommend it is because there's no research. Hester Perez is very particular when it comes to the type of pot she gives Joey. It's not only organic but also veganic. Veganic, which means that it contains no animal products. She also has it tested at a Bay Area lab that tests cannabis, nothing else. Hester Perez says she believes she's taking care to make sure Joey's medical marijuana is safe, and knows in her heart she's made the right decision. He's 12 years old, and thanks to cannabis, I'm having my first with my son, my first of everything. Hester Perez is also experiencing a first by establishing a nonprofit. The Unconventional Foundation for Autism is working to raise money for medical marijuana research, as well as help families caring for autistic children. As you may know, federal government doesn't allow any testing on weed, and so there's no way to know whether this stuff works. I can tell you this, the drug companies of course do not want testing to occur on marijuana. And sorry, Scooter, for using that word, but there's no other word. Cannabis. I'm not trying to use a message word when I say marijuana. But in any event, the drug companies are obviously wanting us on Paxil and Oxy and Marinol and other pills. I received an email late June 2011 from the Marijuana Policy Project. This is the group that promotes medical marijuana laws and actual decriminalization initiatives in the 50 states and at the federal level. Dear Goldy, 2 days ago, without any public comment, President Obama broke the above campaign promise to medical marijuana patients when his Justice Department issued a new departmental policy for enforcement of federal marijuana laws in states with medical marijuana programs. Deputy Attorney General James Cole stated that while federal prosecutors should not go after sick and dying individuals, they may choose to prosecute businesses that provide marijuana to patients, even when the providers are abiding by the state law. To put it simply, this is absurd. Please email the White House today and ask the Obama administration to respect the rights of the states and the needs of the patients by giving medical marijuana providers who act in compliance with state law alone. Despite the memo's claim to the contrary, it contradicts what had been official DOJ policy and flies in the face of numerous past statements by the President and his Attorney General. In May 2010, Attorney General Eric Holder testified in Congress that if the entity is in fact operating consistent with state law and does not have any of those factors involved that are contained in that Deputy Attorney General memo threatening to arrest the dispensary employees, would be inconsistent with what the policy is as we have set it out. So he lied. Please tell the Obama administration that providing channels for patients to safely obtain their doctor-recommended medicine is a crucial component of workable medical marijuana laws. Then please post this link to your Facebook or Twitter account. Without necessary medical marijuana providers, many patients may have to revert to buying marijuana from the criminal market. Think of the woman. Finally, if you were an Obama supporter in any capacity during his 2008 campaign, please call his 2012 campaign headquarters, demand that he keep his promise to medical marijuana patients. Thank you kindly for supporting marijuana policy reform. Sincerely, Rob Campio. I thought when Obama was running, he talked about ending this drug war. That was, of course, before he needed the drug companies and the defense industry that provides the drones to fuel his re-election effort. Just listen to the drug war structural regulatory defect propaganda from the Austin American-Statesman, August 18, 2011, entitled, U.S. Law Enforcement to Expand Training in Mexico Amid Drug War, by Christopher Sherman. Quotes, U.S. law enforcement will train local and state police officers from Mexico as part of the next phase of the two countries' joint fight against transnational drug cartels, a U.S. State Department official said Wednesday. U.S. agencies have been training Mexican federal police on both sides of the border for several years. However, William Brownfield, Assistant Secretary of State for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, said it is clear that local forces face the most concentrated violence, especially in northern Mexico, and are in the most need of training. If we do not address these problems cooperatively today, we will be addressing them on our own front doorsteps in 5 years, Brownfield said. Police training has been a significant part of the Merida Initiative, which outlined the U.S. partnership with Mexico and Central America in the drug war and has committed $1.4 billion since 2008. However, the focus now shifts to historically outgunned and ill-prepared local forces ducking bullets and facing ominous threats on a daily basis. Mexico received $327 million for police training in fiscal 2009 from the U.S. State Department through Merida, placing it behind only Afghanistan and Iraq in total funds received for police training from the Department of State or Defense, according to a report from the Government Accountability Office in April. U.S. involvement in Mexico has drawn attention there recently after Mexico's government confirmed that U.S. intelligence agents operate there, analyzing and exchanging information. The New York Times had reported that CIA agents and former U.S. military personnel are working at a Mexican military base in the fight against drug gangs. Here's another one with an even scarier title. Feds. 60 arrested in Iraqi-Mexican drug ring. Appearing in the Austin American-Statesman, August 19, 2011, by Julie Watson. San Diego. Federal officials said Thursday they busted a drug trafficking ring involving Mexico's most powerful cartel and members of an Iraqi immigrant community in the U.S. who were caught selling illegal drugs, assault rifles, grenades, and homemade explosives. Authorities seized 18 pounds of meth, amphetamine, narcotics, cocaine, and other drugs, more than 3,500 pounds of marijuana, $630,000 in cash, 4 IEDs. All right? This is in San Diego. 4 IEDs and more than 30 guns, including assault rifles. Officials believe the weapons and explosives were meant to be sold locally. and there were no indications the group was supplying Mexico's most violent cartel with weapons for use in that country's drug war, which has claimed at least 35,000 lives. IEDs? Have you heard of an IED going off in the U.S.? It smells. This is why I call the debt limit ceiling debate Casey Anthony goes to Washington. We're either serious about issues or we aren't. And when it comes to the fight of Paxil and Oxy versus weed, the evidence proves that we are not serious about the issues. If we want to save money by cutting wasteful government programs, the drug war is an absolute no-brainer. On the one hand, the article talks about, and think about this, hang on, I just want to talk for a second about those apologists that say, well, we're going to have all these drug addicts and all these weed addicts that need to go to detox. The same thing, the same arguments were made after Prohibition was ended, or prior to Prohibition being ended. We would have all these alcoholics. Well, we have these alcoholics anyway. We have these drug addicts anyway. You will eliminate the people from doing drugs or who are doing it because it is an exotic thing that is illegal. That will be ended. All right. On the one hand, the article talks about former U.S. military personnel, which means private contractors for whom we do not have the money to pay at the behest of the drug companies that want no competition for their products, as well as the lobbying done by these private security companies to get these lucrative federal contracts. On the other hand, why are we paying to have our scant resources in the form of bilingual law enforcement personnel training people in Mexico? Hey, Republicans, don't say you're fiscal conservatives if you support this drug war. It proves your stupidity, or your duplicity, or your hypocrisy. I don't even want to talk about what it does to you Democrats. Quiet Democrats. Just legalize the drugs and tax them. All the crime will go away. Let me give my example again. How many shootings have occurred in H-E-B parking lots between suppliers of Miller Lite versus suppliers of Bud Light? 0. Look at the second part of the propaganda. If we do not address these problems cooperatively today, we will be addressing them on our own front doorsteps in 5 years. It's really a propaganda message. Does this look anything like Bush's phrase, we are fighting the terrorists over there, so we don't have to fight them over here? What a wasteful, stupid, undeclared war, and the American public is too stupid to care, especially Democrats who thought that Obama would end the drug war. He has only stepped it up, and because it is our guy doing it, this is Democrats saying, our guy doing it, there's not a peep out of the Democrats. Libby is great. You know, I almost want to see a Tea Party takeover or debt defaults, and it's only when the lender says no more that an individual household in the U.S. stops borrowing and spending. The same goes for governments, including the federal government. Moving on, when I first read Garrett Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons, it was a used book. In that used book was a letter from someone who had returned the book and called him a racist xenophobe, a monster that only wanted people in Africa to starve and close up the borders. I like the letter because it brings home a serious underlying issue that I've brought up over and over again. That issue is the absolute right of people in this country to have children. And that issue comes right out of Garrett Hardin's argument related to food aid to starving nations. His point, without being moral, was that even at a low birth rate of, say, 1%, a starving population of 100 million people that is helped this year will have 101 million starving people next year, etc., etc. And that's unsustainable forever. I don't even need to get into the morality, of course. We are human. Of course, we don't want babies in Somalia starving. Of course, we don't want to dictate birth control policy to them. Wait, what was that last part? Am I suggesting that as a condition of food aid, we might impose the contraceptive pill on the women who are receiving aid, or vasectomies for the men who are receiving aid? That'd be crazy. How dare I suggest such a thing, such a non-libertarian thing, a total big brother nanny state thing? In any event, Garrett Hardin did suggest such a thing, and has been called a racist for suggesting it. Actually, he was using it as a metaphor for two concepts. One, the tragedy of the commons, and two, the lifeboat theory lifeboat theory of planet Earth, and individual sovereign nations. Let me go to an op-ed that puts the state of affairs as to overpopulation in a very clear light, because you don't really hear about it much. This is from the Austin American-Statesman, July 27, 2011. It was written by Hart and Ehrlich, The Problem with Too Many People. It was Mary Ellen Hart and Ann Ehrlich, special to the Los Angeles Times, July 25, 2011. I'm going to read it because it gives you a good flavor of how people deal with this stuff. Because you don't ever hear about it. Think back on what you talked about with friends and family at your last gathering. The latest game of your favorite team, an addictive hobby, the new movie blockbuster, and a serious moment, maybe job prospects, Afghanistan, the economic mess. We live in an information-drenched environment, one in which sports and favorite programs are just a click away. American Idol. And the ease with which we can do all this allows us to focus on mostly comforting subjects that divert our attention from increasingly real long-term problems. Notice that we didn't mention climate change or the exploding population and consumption levels that are triggering it. The two major factors threatening humanity's future. Remember, I had gone back and Living Within Limits, I'm going off for a second here, and Garrett Hardin followed populations and increases in wealth. And it was populations with increasing wealth that should be the ones to have increasing populations. And in the old days, that's what happened. But in today's world, increasing wealth leads to decreasing populations in any event. Sure, if you're not too far from the western wildfires or midwestern floodplains, the conversation might have turned to the crazy weather that is forcing some media to actually talk about climate change in the context of daily events. Not Fox, by the way. But population, by the way, it's 104 again today in Austin. But population, get out. Way too inconvenient a truth. Take National Public Radio, for example. Of NPR's sparse record of population pieces, just one or two address unsustainable population growth, which, by the way, is all population growth. That's Garrett Hardin's theory. All population growth is unsustainable. Think about that. Back to the article. But as the political right whittles away at family planning clinics, the latest NPR series, The Baby Project, devotes a plethora of articles to pregnancy, with the most serious subjects, the problems some women have conceiving and birthing. If there's even a hint of too many babies, it is well hidden. This, even though a 2009 NPR story on U.S. pregnancies reported that half, yes, half, of all U.S. pregnancies are unintended. And you Republicans are afraid to hand out condoms in schools? Half! It's a lot of unintended consumers adding to our future climate change. And that's what the right calls the liberal side of the mass media. The politically conservative U.S. mass media cover unsustainable population levels even less. You actually never hear it. That pretty much reflects the appalling state of U.S. public education on population. The U.S. approach to population issues across all levels of government, in terms of such things as education, attacks on family planning, and tax deductions for children, is an exercise in thoughtlessness. The ramifications, however, are far more insidious. Women are culturally conditioned to welcome the idea of having children. They don't even think about it, by the way. Plural, not one or none. How to support those children economically is not discussed. Indeed, our abysmal lack of adolescent sex educational programs ensures that there will be plenty of young women who secure their destinies and those of their babies to brutal poverty and shortened lives through unwanted pregnancies and lack of choice. The latest available statistics from the National Poverty Center at the University of Michigan tell the story. 1 in 5 American children lived in poverty in 2008. 1 in 3 if they were black or Latino. Sure, there's much concern that birth rates are down and will result in not enough workers to support the elderly. But this argument is overblown. After all, a 70-year-old can be more economically productive than a 7-year-old. And a large pre-working population inflicts costs on a society. Furthermore, the birth rates in developing nations remain high, and the consequences affect us all. Globally, the effects of overpopulation play a part in practically every daily report of mass human calamity, but the word population is rarely mentioned. Wildfires threaten more people because expanding populations are moving nearer and into forests. Floods inundate more homes as populations expand into floodplains, Mississippi River. Such extreme events are stoked by climate change, fueled by increasing carbon emissions from an expanding global population. Maybe. Overpopulation is also fueling desertification and deforestation. We can dream of decreasing overconsumption by the wealthy, but even realistic potential decreases are voided by sheer human numbers. Our unsustainable population levels are depleting resources and commons and denying a decent future to our descendants. That's true, even here. What to do? Stop the denial. Perpetual growth is the creed of a cancer cell, not a sustainable human society. Promote and support family planning education is a cheap way to reduce poverty and severe climate change. Support organizations that are trying to get contraceptives to the 200 million women in the world who lack and want them, and help them obtain equal rights, education, and job opportunities. And to the women in this country that expect our teachers to be the parents, which is all of them. Condoms in the schools. Back to the article. Access to contraceptives and reproductive freedom are rights that ultimately benefit all of humanity. And by the way, Republicans, if there are less people of color because you handed out contraceptives, there are less of the Democrats that you hate so much. Don't be stupid. Use the Bible. You pick and choose out of the Bible. You can kill Iraqi babies or Libyan babies or Yemeni babies, but that's okay. You can't kill American babies. Where does the Bible differentiate between the babies? Back to the article. Vote for leaders who vigorously promote those humane solutions and demand that media start educating the public on the role played by the unsustainable human numbers behind environmental degradation and human calamities and start covering the solutions. The public needs a constant message. It's time to stop growing and become sustainable. Now, the word sustainable, by the way, is a bad word, at least for the Republicans. Sustainability reminds them of light bulbs. Sustainability reminds them of no more Happy Meals in San Francisco. Sustainable is a good word. We just have to come up with a different word. You have to keep coming up with different words so that the anti-green people can't use those words. Back to the article, last sentence. We can do many things to solve environmental, economic, and social problems, but each is a lost cause if we cannot bring our populations down to sustainable levels. That may be no growth. Number of people that die or the number of babies that you have in the country. Hart is co-author of Cool the Earth, Save the Economy. Ehrlich is a senior research scientist at Stanford University. My friend and former co-host Swill, he was the first one of my associates to point out the stupidity of Republicans' push to limit contraceptives and abortions, both in this country and overseas. Now, getting back to Garrett Hardin and his main points, the tragedy of the commons and the lifeboat theory of the planet Earth. Many, many progressives believe that there is so much fat in this country. When I mean fat, I mean wealth. That we can leave the borders wide open. We'll come up with solutions to energy pollution and food production so we can give away everything to everybody. They also don't like limitations of any kind on the number of children that you can have. That's just some that I know. Hardin responds to these types of people by asking them to open their homes to every starving person in the world, ending the argument. It would require you to have 34 people in your home. Why do you choose certain people and not others? That ends the argument. We can't just open the borders. Now, I know a lot of Republicans will argue that the borders are open. They're not. It's still difficult to get by in this country without being a citizen. Very difficult. And after Perry gets elected, it's going to be extremely difficult. Maybe, we'll see. Being a group of sovereign nations, we all have borders. Most countries have private property rights, which means property boundaries and ownership are respected and enforced in the law. In most of these countries, there are limited amounts of clean air, water, and land, or commons. Obviously, population increases over time will force these countries to use their commons. Not as open space, but as living space. Not as clean water for fish, but for drinking water and flushing toilets. Not for breathing clean air, but for dumping coal dust. In a lifeboat, there are limited resources. I had my friend Scooter in town last weekend, and we agreed on one thing. The idea of growth is a false god. and one that masks very deep structural problems of our society. I had spoken a few weeks ago about the metaphor of my household going through a period of extreme austerity. It was only in this period that I was able to realize what I actually had and what I actually needed. Think about the city of Austin that has had positive population growth for the last 30 years. If you look at tax revenues, they have generally trended up. Similarly, before Lehman Brothers, my income had trended up. I did not really know what I was spending my money on. The city of Austin is the same. As its population has increased, so has its tax revenues, and even more disgustingly, its expenditures and bonded indebtedness, because, of course, it is going to go up forever. So the city council has been and remains unable to get its arms around what it spends and what it has. This example can be extrapolated up to the national level. Population has always increased, and so have tax revenues. And so has spending increased, and bonded indebtedness has increased. They cannot get their arms around what they spend and what they have. In any event, the incentive for politicians in an increasing population environment is to state that revenues increased under their watch, when in effect the obligations have also increased. This is Perry's argument, by the way. You know, increase, the question, the number to look at would be, what was the increase in population growth and what was the increase in job growth in Texas? That's the actual number that you need to look at, not just absolute job increases. It might have been less than the number of people that came in, which means unemployment has increased. Like I said, but these effects are masked by the population increase. We can always grow our way out of it, is the theory. However, since 1974, our standard of living in this country has declined. There have been no or negative real wage increases, replaced with increased household debt to unsustainable levels. Remember when I said that just pushing off the inevitable abyss would make it worse later? Well, I stick with that prediction. I'd like to see the banks fail today that are insolvent. I would like to see all of the foreclosures that are being held off completed. I would like to see us go through some hard times so that we can all figure out how much we spend and how much we really have. Does a person who makes $70,000 a year need $77,000 next year to be happy? Well, the answer depends on how many decorative candles the person buys from Bed Bath & Beyond. Perhaps we do have enough fat in the system to let everyone into the country, and we can pay for every dipshit that wants to have a kid. That wants to have a kid, have that kid. But I doubt it. And if we go through that abyss, that passage may be the greatest thing that has ever happened to this country. If we went through all those bank failures and all those foreclosures and all those unemployed, people would move back into houses. They'd move back in with families. They'd do what it took. They wouldn't buy decorative candles. It may allow us to get our arms around our problems and resources. It may spur us to pass constitutional amendments to limit the terms of our national legislators. We may pass an amendment to limit the power of corporations in electing our politicians. We may pass an amendment limiting the ability of regulators to go into the companies that they regulate, decimating the commons. Then and only then can we determine our policy towards population, both from births and immigration. I think the fat is gone, and we're going to see what we spend and what we have sooner rather than later. Now let me go off a little bit again just to remind you, I had an argument with a professor of a local university, and she pointed out to me, and I've talked about this before in my education rants, that I'm a human and I have the responsibility to pay for her children. And it's hard to argue against that concept. I mean, we're humans, we want to propagate the species. However, my argument is there are plenty of humans on this planet. I don't want to pay for any of your children. I want you to use personal responsibility. I want you to understand that the fat is gone. And the only way you're going to understand the fat is gone is if the lender calls in the loans. So I can't even argue with you now. We're all still fat and happy. There's still people buying homes that shouldn't buy them. There's still people borrowing money for cars that they shouldn't have. There's still people buying decorative candles at Bed Bath & Beyond with credit cards that they can never repay. The fat is still here. It will not go on forever. So those of you that are thinking about having children or child, you have to figure out how you are going to raise that child on your own without help. You are going to have to use personal responsibility, get involved at the school, and if the school goes away, you're going to have to teach your child. You're going to have to buy a property that has a lot that's big enough to put an apartment on it so that your child has a place to live. You can't go out and buy in a crappy subdivision in Hutto, which I'm going to talk about in a second, where you can't build an apartment. You're going to need to have your family back at home in order to pay your taxes. That's what a declining standard of living is. You will be making less. You are making less. And when I say you, I mean 90% of the population. Let me digress on Hutto for a second. I saw an article the other day, and I know I always use Hutto as my example of a place not to move. A buddy of mine just bought a house out there, by the way. They, however, passed a budget that is not going to require a tax increase. They are paying their bills. They are not increasing wages to anybody or doing any new projects. So as much as I make fun of Hutto, sorry. They're actually looking at how much they have and how much they spend. But again, the idea of personal responsibility is something that just does not exist in this country because of the fat. If you weren't doing well, there's plenty of help for you. And that obviously creates incentives to not try. I'm not saying everybody who receives things doesn't try, but it sure creates an incentive not to try if you know you're going to get food stamps. I'm not saying eliminate welfare at all. I'm saying there is an incentive there, though. Some of these Republicans are correct, and there is an incentive not to work. And we're not talking about legitimate people that can't work. But the fact is, we do need to watch what's going to happen over the next few years. If Obama gets elected, the calamity will probably happen sooner. If Perry gets elected, we'll probably all do better. Us attorneys and real estate people and elite support. I'm going to give you the last thing here. And I'm going to say it again. My friend A in Dallas, sorry. Do not vote for Rick Perry. He is a corporate lackey. And the most destructive thing that has happened in this country in the last 30 or 40 years, besides, of course, the War Powers Act, was George Bush appointing these idiots to the Supreme Court who are pro-corporation and say that corporations have a free speech right, and that entitles them to spend as much as they want on political campaigns. We know the founders did not mean that. So don't call yourself a constitutional conservative or libertarian and think that by supporting a Republican candidate who can appoint Supreme Court justices that are pro-corporate, that has anything to do with what the Constitution says. It doesn't. You want to talk about an activist court? This is an activist court. You're worried about activists? Brown versus Board of Education forcing busing? Does anybody worry about that? Is that activist? Eliminating racism? Institutionalized, government-supported racism? That's activist? Activist is giving your buddies in the corporations the power to get whatever they want out of the commons. Write their own leases. Write their own regulations. That's activist. Now, Tom Hartman, you hear him there on Free Speech TV. There are a few people out there that say that. Very few. Very, very few. Just use some personal responsibility if you're going to have a child and assume that you're not going to get anything from this government out of it. And then you can have your kids. I'm okay with it. I've chosen not to have them. And I'm able to survive during this austerity time. I'm not saying I could if I had kids. I'd be in trouble. Alright, I'm going to be taking a little break from doing this thing, this rant. Hopefully it will allow my brain to cool down a little. It's 105 degrees down here. I may do some more rants from time to time, and I want those of you that send things in to keep sending them in. And keep calling. Keep emailing me. We'll keep talking. You know who you are. Thanks for watching, listening, and reading. I want to thank all of our sponsors. We support this form of conversation, but not necessarily the content of this conversation. PianoByAngelo.com, Angelo Limbesi's, who teaches and plays keyboards all over Austin. ZetaDesign.com for all of your decorative painting needs. You can make anything look like anything. AustinAreaPlumbing.com for all of your Austin plumbing problems. TicoAdventureLodge.com, a small hotel in Samara, Costa Rica. CNC Surf School in Samara at www.cncsurfsamara.webs.com. La Vela Latina, great sunset bar and restaurant in Samara. Ambar Tequila at SantosSpirits.com. Another cool 4-unit green hotel in Samara called The Logan at www.thelogansamara.com. And of course, the Delicate Genius in Houston, who's a platinum sponsor. Also want to thank my Tea Party friend, my friend from Connecticut, Scooter from Houston, the Indelicate Genius. Basically anybody who's ever responded to any of these things, positive or negatively, I really appreciate it. It really helps me think. Someone who is surrounded by yes men will not make good decisions, as George Bush figured out. So I want to thank you all, and thanks for coming out.